If you want to learn real history, real economics, and real political theory, then check out Liberty Classroom. Go to wakeupcallpodcast.com/liberty. That's wakeupcallpodcast.com/liberty to learn more. Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call Podcast. Today I'm speaking with Mr. Alex Nowrasteh about DACA and immigration reform. Alex is an immigration policy analyst at the Cato Institute's Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity. His work has appeared in most major U.S. publications, including The Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and The Washington Post. He is a co-author of Open Immigration, Yay and Nay. You can follow his work at cato.org, and you can find him on Twitter at Alex Nowrasteh. That's at Alex, Nowrasteh. For more information, please see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/immigration-reform. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. So this first section is going to be pretty tough to answer, but I want to try to lay some groundwork and figure out, get some background established as far as just what the current immigration setup looks like in the U.S. So why is the immigration system in the U.S. so complicated and messy? And is there any way to give some sort of overview of what the current system looks like?
So it's difficult to, I'll give you sort of a short answer and then elaborate a bit. Some American judges have described the immigration system as second in complexity only to the income tax. So just to talk about one portion of it, this is the portion for a green card, which allows you to settle permanently in the United States, work, and if you follow the rules, eventually become a citizen if you want to. This system lets in about 1 million people a year. 2/3 of those people have to be related to an American, so closely related to an American citizen or a person who already has a green card. About 14% of them have to be hired by an American company. They have to have high skills. The company has to prove that there's no one else who could do these jobs. And then there's about 10% who are humanitarian. That is, they are refugees, asylum seekers, etc. And then there's about 60,000 people who arrive on a lottery, sort of a green card lottery that's available to only a handful of people. So that altogether comes out to about 1 million a year, those numbers. And if you notice, one category that isn't there is for a low-skilled worker. There is no green card category for a low-skilled worker to come to this country legally unless they are closely related to an American citizen or a green card holder. There are some number of temporary guest worker visas that allow low-skilled workers to work in like agriculture or seasonal employment, but almost all jobs in the economy are closed off and protected from any kind of foreign labor entering. And so as a result, the immigration system is very complicated, and as in other areas, when you have a lot of rules and regulations and complexity, you get a very large black market. So as a result of this, the U.S. economy still demands low-skilled labor from abroad. There's no way or very few ways for them to come in lawfully, so they come in illegally, or they come in legally and overstay their visas and work in the black market.
Yeah, and when we talk about people illegally immigrating to the United States and being illegal immigrants, do you have any numbers as far as how many of those are coming across borders? I know a lot of people have this vision of immigrants swimming across the Rio Grande or going through the desert to get to Arizona or California or New Mexico. Do you have any idea how many illegal immigrants are crossing over the Rio Grande into Texas or over into the American Southwest through the desert versus how many are illegal as a result of visa overstays and any other categories that illegal immigrants might fit into?
So if you take a look at all the current illegal immigrants in the United States, the stock of them that are here, which is like 11 to 12 million about, depending on the estimates, somewhere around half of those entered legally and overstayed their visas, and about half of them entered illegally, either by crossing the border with Mexico, by entering like in a smuggled shipping container, across the border with Canada, or a boat in Florida, or other areas like that. The other half entered legally, usually on a tourist visa. and when their visa ran out, they stayed in the United States. Over time, though, this is that percentage that overstayed has increased. So of the new illegal immigrants in the year 2012, about 60% of them actually entered legally and overstayed their visas. So over time, that percentage is increasing. And part of the reason why it's increasing so much is that the number crossing the border illegally is and entering that way is way down over the years. So to give you an example, it's hard to measure black markets, of course, but we use the number of apprehensions of on the border of illegal immigrants apprehended by Border Patrol agents as a proxy for how intense the flow is into the United States. And it peaked at 1.6 million in the year 2000, and last year was about 400,000. So it's down by about 75%, those people trying to enter the United States, which is the reason why the percentage who enter legally and overstay is increasing over time.
Okay, so let's look at some reasons to argue on behalf of immigration and more liberalized immigration laws. What is the economic impact of immigration, and how can immigration help an economy and be a net boon to an economy?
So economists have this measurement they use called place premium, and that is how much an identical worker makes in one country versus another country. So take a look at like a high school graduate with 10 years of education. How much do they make in Mexico versus how much in the United States? And in that worker, if he comes from Mexico to the U.S., can expect a threefold increase in income. Indian worker with the same education can expect a sixfold increase. A Haitian can expect a tenfold increase. And the median across the developed world is a fourfold increase, and that adjusts for the cost of living increase in the United States. So that's a very high increase in wages from coming to the U.S., and that's because workers in the U.S. are more productive than they are in other countries. Wages are determined by the amount of production that the worker can make, the amount of things, goods, and services that he can provide over the given period of time that he's paid. So that's what determines wages in our economy. And the reason why wages are higher here is because workers are more productive, and they're more productive because we have relative free markets, contract rights, security, et cetera, that allows us to be more productive and to accumulate education in a profitable way. Now, the interesting question is, so workers come here from the third world, they become more productive, they get higher wages, they make more things. How does that affect the wages of native-born Americans? Now, if you take a look at all of the peer-reviewed academic research on this topic, the most negative study you'll find is by Harvard economist George Borjas. And what he found is that immigration from the year 1990 to about 2010, period of time when about 30 million people entered the United States, legally or illegally, decreased the wages of Americans who are high school dropouts by about 1.7%. Those high school dropouts account for about 10% of the population, but they increased the wages of every other American by education group by about 1% or so per year. And that's the most negative finding, with the net overall effect that American workers saw a wage increase due to immigration of about half a percentage point over that 20-year period. And that's the most negative finding you'll find in the entire academic peer-reviewed literature. Most findings find that every single cohort of American workers by education actually sees pretty small but positive wage increases as a result of immigration. Now, if you know anything about economics, that'll probably sound pretty funny to you, right? You have sort of this big increase in workers, and then you have increase in wages. Like, that doesn't make any sense if you think about it for a second, because if you have a big increase in supply, all else remaining equal, you should expect wages to decrease, for the price to decrease. The difference here is that immigrants are not just workers, they're also consumers. They buy things. They buy goods and services. And the purchase of goods and services in the U.S. increases demand for labor. So we have sort of the first thing that happens is it increases supply when they come here, then demand increases. And as a result, that makes up for most of the wage loss that would have happened for most Americans. Some of the other factors that matter is that immigrants and native-born Americans just don't compete that much. language differences, differences in skill, differences in communication. All of these things matter a lot. So as a result, you just don't get much competition between American workers and immigrant workers, even when their educations are the same. Now, the group of people who are in the United States who compete with immigrants the most are actually other immigrants. So there are substantial wage declines for immigrant workers who have been here for a while, competing with new immigrant workers who just came in. So basically, immigrants absorb all of that competitive pressure that people think Americans face, but they actually don't.
All right, and in addition to concerns about wages that we often hear from people arguing against increased immigration, we also hear concerns about national security and about the safety and security of individual Americans. So what is your research? What are the studies? What does the data have to say about that issue?
So we did a study here at the Cato Institute where I took a look at the number of Americans killed by terrorist attacks on U.S. soil committed by people who were born abroad from 1975 to the end of 2015. And I found during that time period there were 3,024 Americans killed in terrorist attacks, 98.6% of those on 9/11 committed by foreigners. That means that during that time period, your annual chance of being murdered in a terror attack committed by a foreigner is about 1 in 3.6 million per year. Now, to compare that to your chance of dying in a homicide during that time period, it's about 1 in 14,000 per year. So the chances of dying in a terror attack committed by a foreigner is very small during that time period. And then I divided up by different visa categories or different types of immigrants. So basically, during that time period, one illegal immigrant terrorist was able to kill one American during that 41-year time period, which means your chance of dying, your annual chance is about 1 in 10.9 billion per year of being murdered in a terror attack committed by an illegal immigrant. Lots of people are worried about refugees in terrorism. I found during this time period that refugee terrorists were able to murder 3 Americans in terrorist attacks on U.S. soil, which means there's a 1 in 3.64 billion chance per year of being murdered in a terror attack committed by a refugee. So the risks are pretty small. The other angle of national security is basically whether people who are here, sort of like espionage, like do they send secrets back home? Do they go back home and give secrets, military secrets to their home government? The best example of this is the case of this Chinese rocket scientist named Qian Shusen. And he came over in the 1930s, brilliant rocket scientist. He helped create the American missile programs after World War II. It was discovered that at a time when he was young, he had attended some Communist Party meetings while in college. He denied this. His colleagues denied that he was a communist. American generals who worked with him denied that he was a communist. But the government didn't care. They deported him back to communist China, where he built their entire missile program from scratch. So that's one area where there's sort of a national security aspect to immigration, but it's one that was made worse by American laws that seek to protect us.
Now, regarding the refugee issue, a lot of people would point to what they're seeing in France, Germany, Sweden, throughout Europe, and say that there have been increases in violent crime, in rape, in murders and things of that sort as a result of an influx of refugees there. So how do you address that claim? Is that based off of faulty data, or is it just based off of a few anecdotes? How would you address that claim?
There's more truth to it in Europe than there is in the United States. That is for sure. The people who are the terrorists, though, are usually not the refugees. That's actually pretty rare, or the asylum seekers. The people who are most likely seem to be European Muslims born in Europe to immigrant parents or grandparents who carry out most of these attacks and most of these deadly fatalities. Not entirely, but that seems to be most of the cause of this. When you take a look, though, during the same time period, 1975 through, if you extend it a little bit, from 1975 to 2017, and you take a look at your chances of dying in terrorism in Europe, it's actually lower than the United States during this entire time period. But it has picked up quite a bit in recent years. So the trend lines are increasing. So to give you like an example, in Germany during that time period, your chance of being murdered in a terrorist attack is about 1 in 23.2 million per year. While in the United States, it's from any terrorist attack, it's about 1 in 3.2 million. So before I said it was 1 in 3.6, that's just for foreign-born. This is for all terrorism. So it's higher in the United States than in every single country in Europe except for the United Kingdom. And that's because of the IRA bombings, which killed many, many people in the 80s, 90s, and the 70s. So terrorism is picking up a bit in Europe. There are more people being killed now than there were, say, 10 years ago, but it's still a lot lower than it was in the 70s and 80s when a bunch of left-wingers and communists and other terrorists were killing people. Now, in terms of crime, there's less good data on this. American crime data is generally garbage. It's not a great source of information. It's not well kept. But compared to European crime data, it's masterful, beautiful, complicated, nuanced, granular, and correct. There's just not good European crime data by race, by ethnicity, by foreign-born population, by any of that stuff, but by nativity, by religion, because European countries historically are very homogeneous. So they haven't started to collect these things. And in some places, like in France, it's illegal to collect that kind of information. It's illegal for the government to do that. So we just don't have a great sense of who's committing crimes in Europe and at what rates. Now, what we do know, though, is that European crime rates have been on the rise for the last 15, 20 years or so. And part of the reason could be immigration. It could be other reasons, though. Crime rates do fluctuate over time, and they don't seem, at least in the United States, to be correlated at all with the foreign-born population. In fact, the opposite. It seems to be the more immigrants, the less crime there is in the United States. But Europe could be different. There's no reason why that has to be the case. But we just don't have like the best information. There was a recent study that looked at areas in Germany where refugees and asylum seekers were settled, and it found a slight increase in property crime, and nuisance crimes and these types of things, but it also found a slight decrease in violent crime and other things like that. So there's really complicated things going on. We don't quite understand it. We don't have good data, but I think we can say fairly confidently that the situation is worse in Europe than it is in the United States.
All right. Now, one concern that you'll hear from some libertarians and I guess from some conservatives as well regarding the immigration issue is they'll point to the welfare system and increased welfare costs as a result of immigration. They'll say that immigrants, both legal and illegal, tend to be on the government dole in greater numbers than American residents that are not immigrants, that are second, third, fourth generation, whatever. So what do the figures say about welfare and how often immigrants go on the government dole and use government welfare services?
So first off, there are a lot of restrictions on foreign-born people getting welfare benefits in the United States. If you're on a green card, you do not have access to means-tested welfare benefits for your first 5 years in the United States. Individual states can have exceptions to that, but they have to pay for it for state money. Illegal immigrants don't have access to means-tested welfare benefits with the exception of like emergency Medicaid, which is like you go to an emergency room, and there's some like women, infant, and children program, which is for sort of kids, sort of for like young kids. So if you're a young kid and a legal immigrant, you can get some of those benefits. And then there's so some very other small benefits that you're allowed to get, basically on the cheapest welfare programs. But generally, you're blocked from all of those benefits. If you're in a work permit, you can't get anything, etc. So as a result, when you take a look at immigrant use rates and the dollar value that they use of welfare benefits, it's lower than for native-born Americans. And when they are on these programs, they consume a lower dollar value, such that if native-born Americans consumed, if poor native-born Americans consumed Medicaid at the same rate as poor immigrants, and the dollar value and benefits that they consumed was the same, then Medicaid itself would be 42% smaller than it currently is. So the net fiscal effect of immigration on the United States, when you take a look at like the taxes they pay as well as the benefits they consume, most studies find it's about break even over the long run. A recent report by the National Academy of Sciences found that it's positive, that immigrants contribute more to the system in taxes than they consume in benefits. And one of the more interesting results is that's because even controlling for age and everything else, the amount of benefits that immigrants get from Medicare, from Social Security, is far less than for natives. And if immigrants come a little bit later in life, like in their teenage years or by the age of 20, then we, as taxpayers, don't have to pay for their education. So if you think about it this way, like I went to public school, right, from the ages of like 6 or 7 to 18. I wasn't paying anything in taxes, but I was costing a lot of money to the taxpayers. I mean, I went from kindergarten to high school and public school in California. So that's 13 years. So by the time I'm done, let's say it costs $10,000 on average per year, that's $130,000 in taxpayer costs immediately, like before I even started working or have the chance to really work legally. An illegal immigrant, or immigrant, by the way, who comes at the age of 20, they didn't get paid anything before then. They're at zero. So they're starting off at a better footing than native-born Americans are in terms of welfare. So that's why they appear much more positive fiscally than native-born Americans. We don't have to pay for their initial education, and when they retire, we don't pay as much in Social Security and Medicare because they either retire abroad or they don't get those benefits to the same extent or amount. And in the between, they use less welfare benefits than native-born Americans generally, but especially if you control for poverty and these other characteristics that determine whether you're even eligible.
All right, and one more broad issue that I want to get to before we get to some more specific areas and some more recent controversies. But I want to talk about the whole issue surrounding culture and changing demographics. There will be some people who say that immigration is a great thing for culture because it infuses American society with more people representing a wider variety of cultures that might not otherwise be represented, and that cultural exchange and interaction is beneficial to American society on net. There are other people who say that it distorts and in some cases can destroy the culture of those that are already in the U.S., and that the changing demographics and ultimately changing electorates can have negative political consequences and swing politics in the U.S. in directions that have negative effects. So some of this is going to be hard to quantify, but what does the research say about changing cultures and changing demographics and ultimately changing electorates as a result of immigration?
Well, I'll take the cultural question just first. Like, does it truly change culture? And we don't really see that. Immigrants tend to assimilate into the local culture, and if they don't, their kids and grandkids do. The rate of assimilation culturally in terms of linguistics, family size, religiosity, civic participation, political opinion, everything like this, everything that we can measure, basically shows that the rate of assimilation of immigrants today and their kids is the same as it was 100 years ago for immigrants from back then. It's really unchanged for every reason, for a whole boatload of reasons. But it's really just the same trajectory we've always seen in terms of that. There's really no difference. In terms of the electorate, this is what I think is the best argument against liberalized immigration, is that somehow by allowing more immigrants, they're going to change. They're going to have different opinions about politics and policy. They're going to vote differently, and that voting will change policy such that economic freedom will decrease enough that the extra economic benefit we get of them being here will be outweighed by the decline in the quality of economic freedom, Thus, it's really a net loss. I think that's the best potential argument against liberalized immigration. Fortunately, we can take a look at this from several different angles empirically, and it's not true. So when you take a look at opinion, for instance, the General Social Survey measures opinion on a whole range of issues, from ideology to your opinion on government spending, on welfare, on taxes, Social Security, everything, government assistance to the poor. And when you take a look at all these questions, just about the opinions of immigrants who are citizens who can vote in the United States is statistically insignificantly different from that of other native-born Americans. And by the second generation, any small differences that appear, that they're not statistically significant differences, but any of them, they're even narrower by the second generation. So they really disappear. The immigrants don't have that different of opinions going forward. Coming to the United States, with the exception of really one policy area, and that is immigration. So immigrants do like immigration, much more so than native-born Americans do, to a huge extent. So as a result, immigrants aren't going to change policy due to their opinions in other places because there's just not that much difference, except on the issue of immigration, which I think explains partly why immigrants do vote overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party and have since about 1798 in the United States. No matter what the Democrats believe in and anything else, during that time period, they have been consistently more pro-immigration than any other party that they compete against. And as a result, immigrants and their immediate descendants tend to vote for the Democratic Party, I think because that party treats them better. So we see that going back to 1798 when the Democratic Party decided to say, hey, immigration is pretty good for the U.S. The Federalist Party at the time said, no, it's not. Since then, it's basically gone in that way. And that's one of the reasons why you see in my home state of California, the Republican Party committed suicide in 1994, in the early 1990s, when it decided to blame immigrants, especially illegal immigrants, for all of the state's problems. As a result, the Hispanic share of the vote for the GOP governor in that state went from 47% in 1990. 47% of Hispanics voted for the GOP gubernatorial candidate in 1990, down to 25% in 1994 when they started this campaign, down to 17% in 1998. And it's remained that low since then because the GOP in that state has decided to attack immigrants. Now in Texas, during that same time period, the GOP did the exact opposite. They started to appeal to immigrants. They started to appeal to Hispanics, and as a result, their share of the immigrant vote or of the Hispanic vote was about 50%. On the state level. And that's the big difference. That's one of the major differences between these states is this appeal to people not blaming immigrants, not blaming their descendants for a lot of problems. It's a lot easier to do that to try to get them on board your program or at least split the vote. So the major harm, the major danger is actually blaming immigrants for a lot of these problems because then they do vote for the party that likes them more no matter what their position is on other policies. Now, we've also done a good amount of peer-reviewed work in the Journal Public Choice and the Journal for Economic Behavior and Organization. We take a look at the impact of immigrants on the Economic Freedom Score, which is a score we put together here of economic freedom in the United States and every other country. And we find that immigration, flows of immigrants over time, is correlated with improvements in the economic freedom score and increases in economic freedom, both in the United States and overseas. So while potentially the decline, immigrants could destroy institutions in the United States and make us poor, we just don't see any evidence of that.
If you want to win debates and be able to better argue free market ideas, check out Liberty Classroom. For a mere 24 cents a day, which is less than $8 a month, you can learn real history, real economics, and real political theory. Go to wakeupcallpodcast.com/liberty. That's wakeupcallpodcast.com/liberty to learn more and to become a more effective debater. All right, now I want to turn our attention to some more specific issues related to immigration that have been in the news recently, and that's how we'll spend the remainder of our time in this discussion. And I mentioned DACA in the introduction, and man, has DACA been talked about a lot lately. So can you explain what exactly is DACA, and what's the whole controversy surrounding DACA?
So DACA was a program created by President Barack Obama in June 2012 that said, if you came to the U.S., under the age of 16, if you didn't commit any crimes, a few other things you have to check, a few other boxes you have to check, then you can get this thing called DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and it basically grants you a temporary work permit that has to be renewed every couple of years, and says you won't be deported unless you commit a crime, like you're not a target for deportation, and you can work legally and pay taxes, etc., above board. There was controversies from the beginning about whether that was constitutional or not, whether the law actually gives the president the power to do that or not. Regardless, about 800,000 people who fit that category got their work permits through DACA. Currently, there are about 690,000 of them who have it, and President Trump campaigned, when he was candidate, Trump campaigned on ending this program. And he finally did so about a month ago. He ended the program, said that people can renew for the next month, but then beginning in March 2018, we're not going to be, basically people are going to start leaving the program. Their work permits are going to be expiring, and they're not going to be able to renew them. So there's sort of 690,000 people who have it currently are going to start basically becoming illegal immigrants again, where they will not have any work permits, and it will be illegal for them to work in the United States.
Okay, and I should have asked this earlier, but how many immigrants are deported on an annual basis, and what percentage are deported? Do you have any idea there?
So it changes pretty dramatically over the years. The Obama administration actually saw the largest extent of deportations in American history was actually under the Obama administration, believe it or not. Let me just get these numbers real quick. But the years of 2009, 10, 11, and 12 were some of the biggest years for deportation in the United States. So in those years, removals from the interior of the United States, or deportations, were ranged between 237,000 per year to about 181,000 per year. So you're talking about a small percentages of the illegal immigrant population. You're talking about basically an average of 1.75% of the illegal immigrant population is deported every year of the presidency of Barack Obama, which is the highest rate of deportation of any president we've recorded. And it's important to note that this does not count people who were apprehended at the border coming in. This only counts people who were arrested in the interior of the United States and removed. So in the last year of the Obama administration, the number of people deported was basically less than 100,000. So he did wind down deportations after 2012, and he started to shift them many more so sort of in the direction of just focusing on criminals. But this administration is now ramping that up again. It will take some years to get back to the sort of high points of the Barack Obama administration of hundreds of thousands per year. But arrests are up dramatically, and it just takes some time for those arrests to actually get translated into deportations.
All right. Now, sometimes mentioned in the same breath as DACA, we'll hear about DAPA. So what exactly is DAPA, D-A-P-A? What is it, and how much of a controversy is there surrounding that program?
So DAPA is Deferred Action for Parental Arrivals. It's basically an expansion of DACA whereby their parents and some other people are allowed to get it. It was shut down very rapidly by the courts. It was put in place in 2014 by Barack Obama. It was shut down very rapidly by the courts, and it never actually went into effect. So that's a dead letter. That memo that created that has been rescinded by the Trump administration, so that's not going anywhere. But that was just an expansion of DACA that Obama tried.
All right. Now, lately we've been hearing a lot about the RAISE Act. So what is that? And then, of course, the whole issue surrounding the Dreamers and both state and potentially federal DREAM Acts. That issue has been a controversial one for years and years. So the RAISE Act and then Dreamers and DREAM Act. What exactly are all of those things?
So the RAISE Act is a bill introduced by Senators Cotton and Perdue, and what it would do is cut legal immigration in half and put a system in place that they claim would favor basically skilled workers over lower skilled workers. In reality, what the bill would do is just cut legal immigration in half and actually decrease the number of skilled people who come into the United States overall. The RAISE Act seems to be pretty unpopular. I think it's a dead letter. But it would be very bad for the United States. The Dreamers are those people who were brought to the United States as children illegally. They've grown up here, so they speak English. They've gone through much of the education system, etc. But they're still illegal immigrants, and they're sort of the most sympathetic group because they didn't choose to come in illegally. They just grew up here because of choices for their parents. So they're working now on Capitol Hill to try to do a bill to legalize some of these folks in response to President Trump canceling DACA. So that's basically what the Dreamers are, and the DREAM Act would legalize them and put them on a path to citizenship if it becomes law.
Now, there are DREAM Acts at the state level in many places, correct? How many of those are there?
Yeah, there's a bunch of those at the state level, but they do different things. So this is part of the confusing terminology. So basically, a DREAM Act on a local level or a state level basically says for purposes of interacting with just the state government for education, for other reasons, for basically for education, the Dreamers will be treated as state residents. So they get access to like in-state tuition. The government, the police departments will treat them as if they're legal residents, so they won't turn them over to deportation unless they commit a serious felony or a serious crime. So those are different. The states where this is in effect, there's a bunch of states sort of in the Northeast, most blue states, as well as Texas, where this is in effect.
All right, and two recent controversies, at least since Trump's presidential campaign began, are the travel ban that we've seen enforced to varying degrees by his administration, and then the prospect of a border wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. So what did the travel ban consist of, and what sorts of bans were already in place? How did that change things? And then as far as the border wall goes, what's the status of that, and what type of fence already exists on the border?
So currently on the border, there is a fence to stop pedestrians along about 350 miles of it, and then there's a fence on another 350 miles that's supposed to stop vehicles from driving over. The border is a total of 2,000 miles or so long with Mexico. That's basically a fence, so those barriers are fences, so you can see through them. There doesn't seem to be much enthusiasm on Capitol Hill for expanding the border wall to cover the entire border, but the estimates are it would cost about $43 billion over 10 years to build and maintain a border wall. It's a pretty expensive prospect and pretty unnecessary given that the number of illegal immigrants crossing over the border is very low compared to what it used to be. I don't think the border wall or a border fence will get built. Maybe a little bit and some sections will get built, but generally I don't think it's going to happen. There's just not much enthusiasm for it. In terms of the travel ban, there's been 3 travel bans. I'll just talk about the most recent one because they all sort of modify each other. But basically it picks out 8 countries around the world, and it says for either all people from these countries or for some people from these countries on certain visas, they're not allowed to come to the United States. And the rationale for this is national security. These people are terrorist threats, essentially, or could do harm while here in the United States. It's the justification that's given for that. There is a controversy over whether the president can even do this legally. There is a section of the law that says the president can block people for national security reasons, but there was a statute that was passed later after that said the president cannot discriminate based on country of origin. in making any kind of rules and regulations like that. And what these rules do is they do discriminate basically in country of origin. So that's a big controversy. Because he issued a new executive order modifying his old ban, there was a case that was going to the Supreme Court that has now been canceled because of that. So we're waiting for a new lawsuit to maybe come up to challenge the newest iteration of the travel ban.
All right, so we've obviously talked about a whole lot of recent controversies and recent reforms that have been posed by both those in favor of more liberalized immigration laws and by those in favor of restrictions on immigration and a crackdown on illegal immigration. But what sorts of reforms would you like to see? What sorts of reforms do you think would be helpful in pushing immigration laws in a direction that you would prefer?
So I think one law, and something that we've written about, we call it a state-based or state-sponsored visa, where basically we create a federal visa that's for economic purposes, and then we let the states sponsor or select or sponsor or find ways, create mechanisms to sponsor these types of people to come in from abroad on visas that they design. So they could be for economics, they could be investor visas or entrepreneurs or for workers and different types of workers. And the states could basically compete against each other for creating visas to sponsor people from abroad to come into the United States. It's sort of based on a system that Canada has and Australia also has that have both been very effective. So we think that's a good way moving forward to get some better types of visas as well as more visas for economic immigrants in the United States. I think another policy that would be an improvement would be to create a green card category where you basically sell the green card to the highest bidder. You know, you make sure they're not a national security risk or a criminal or sick or anything like that, but you sell it to the highest bidder, or you just sell them at a fixed price and you use that money to pay down the national debt. So I think if you do that, you're going to be guaranteed to get immigrants who can make more money to make up for that price, who can live in the United States, and taxpayers hopefully get a little bit of a break, at least from that. So those are two ideas that I think could make a very big impact in the short run in terms of improving immigration quality in the United States and the benefits that we get from immigrants.
Yeah, and we hear horror stories about how long it takes people in many cases to become citizens and to be able to legally immigrate to the United States. So it sounds like, at least on that second suggestion, that could potentially go a long ways towards improving that situation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're an Indian immigrant trying to get an employment-based green card, the wait time is between it's estimated because we don't actually know, but it's 70 to 140 years. So it's a joke, right? It's like a Soviet Union. It's a Soviet-style system, right? I mean, you have to wait in line for the rest of your life. So it's really a disastrous system. So as a result, being able to pay to get a green card doesn't take it away from anybody else. We just create more green cards and sell them. Some of those people would be willing to do that. It would shorten that line, so it would really help everybody.
All right, and one final question for you before we wrap up. We discussed DACA briefly earlier. Of course, DACA has been in the news a lot, and it's been perhaps the most contentious portion of the immigration debate, at least in recent weeks. So do you have any predictions as far as where the whole DACA debate is headed and what might happen there and what might happen with all the people affected by the existence of DACA?
I am fairly pessimistic about DACA becoming, or a permanent legalization for the Dreamers or the DACA kids becoming law. This Congress doesn't seem to be able to do anything, even when they mostly agree on the goal, and they mostly don't agree on DACA and legalization. It's very popular amongst the American public, not so popular in Capitol Hill. So I'm just not that optimistic that they'll be able to figure something out.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me today and for being so generous with your time. Just to remind everybody, what are the best ways to follow your work?
So the best ways are to go to Cato's website. That's cato.org. That's cato.org. And either look up my scholar page or take a look at the topic page when it comes to immigration. The other way is to follow me on Twitter. My handle on Twitter is at Alex Nowrasteh. That's at AlexNowrasteh. So that's those are the best ways to follow our work.
Okay, great. And I want to remind everybody that the show notes page for today's episode is wakeupcallpodcast.com/immigration-reform. So that's going to be the place to go for all of the resources and links related to this episode and that have been mentioned and referenced over the course of this conversation. So that's wakeupcallpodcast.com/immigration-reform. And I want to encourage everybody while they're on our website to sign up for our email list so you can get updates on the show and updates when new episodes are published, as well as to subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes or Stitcher or your preferred podcatcher so you can get all the episodes as they come out. And Alex, thank you so much for joining me today. And I know I kept you way over time. Thank you for being so generous with your time. And as amazing as it may sound, we've done over 160 episodes and we haven't had an episode devoted to immigration yet. So here it is. And there was a lot to tackle, a lot to go over. Thank you so much for helping me to take a look at all of the many parts to the immigration issue, or at least as many as we could look at here. And I look forward to having you back on as there are more controversies surrounding the immigration issue.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure, and I look forward to coming back on in the future.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast. If you'd like to listen to more episodes, please check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also contact us via our website. And thanks again for listening.